River, once a mighty waterway flowing with biblical significance,
the Jordan River is Christianity's third holiest spot. Christians believe John the Baptist baptized Jesus at the site.
now trickles in many places like a forgotten stream. Where prophets once stood and Jesus was baptized, tourists today often find disappointing, muddy banks and shallow waters. The river's volume has diminished by more than 90% over the past 5 decades, raising alarm among the environmentalists and religious scholars alike. Is this merely the result of human mismanagement and climate change, or could it be something more, a fulfillment of ancient prophecies that speak of dramatic environmental shifts in humanity's final chapter? As we explore this dwindling waterway, we'll navigate between scientific evidence and spiritual interpretation, seeking to understand if the Jordan's fate is an environmental warning, a divine message, or perhaps both simultaneously. To truly grasp what's at stake as the Jordan River recedes, we must first understand its profound historical importance. This isn't just any river, it's arguably the most significant waterway in religious history. For thousands of years, the Jordan has been much more than a geographical feature separating territories. In biblical narratives, it marked the boundary between wilderness wandering and promised fulfillment. When Joshua led the Israelites across its waters, the moment symbolized divine deliverance and the beginning of a new era. The river physically divided the desert from the fertile lands of milk and honey, making it both literal and metaphorical boundary between hardship and hope. For Christians, the Jordan holds particular significance as the site of Jesus' baptism by John the Baptist. This pivotal moment marked the beginning of Christ's ministry and established a ritual that billions would follow. The waters that touched the Messiah became sacred by association, drawing pilgrims for 2 millennia who sought to immerse themselves in the same waters. Throughout history, the Jordan has witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. Canaanites, Israelites, Romans, Byzantines, various Islamic caliphates, Ottomans, and modern nation-states have all controlled its banks. Kings and prophets walked alongside it, armies crossed it, and ordinary people have depended on it for drinking water, irrigation, and livelihoods. Today, the river forms a natural border between Jordan, Israel, and Palestinian territories, making it not just religiously significant, but politically charged. Its waters have been fought over, negotiated for, and written into modern peace treaties. As populations have grown and tensions have simmered, the Jordan has transformed from a symbol of abundance to one of scarcity. Environmental crisis, the drying reality. When we examine the Jordan River today through a scientific lens, the statistics paint a disturbing picture. What once flowed at over 1.3 billion cubic meters annually has dwindled to barely 100 million cubic meters, less than 10% of its historical flow. In some stretches, particularly south of the Sea of Galilee, what was once a 50-meter wide river has contracted to a mere 2 meters in width, with depths too shallow to support proper baptism ceremonies. Climate researchers have documented temperature increases of approximately 2.1 degrees cm in the Jordan Valley over the past 50 years, significantly higher than the global average. This warming trend has accelerated evaporation rates and reduced the snowpack on Mount Hermon, the river's primary source. Precipitation patterns have grown increasingly erratic, with rain events becoming less frequent but more intense, leading to flash flooding rather than sustainable water absorption. The river's decline follows a troubling pattern. Historical records show that as recently as the 1960s, the Jordan's annual flow remained relatively stable. By the 1980s, visible reductions were apparent but not yet critical. The 1990s saw accelerated decline, and the 21st century has witnessed what some hydrologists describe as hydrological collapse in certain sections. Water quality has deteriorated alongside quantity. Salinity levels have increased fivefold in some stretches as less fresh water dilutes the naturally occurring salt deposits. Bacteria counts regularly exceed international standards for recreational waters. In the lower sections, treated sewage makes up a significant portion of the remaining flow, creating both health hazards and religious dilemmas for those wishing to use the water for baptisms. The tributary streams that once fed the Jordan have similarly suffered. The Yarmouk River, historically providing about 40% of the Jordan's water, has been reduced to seasonal flows. Smaller streams have disappeared entirely, eliminating entire micro-ecosystems. Remote sensing satellites now monitor the river's diminishment through time-lapse imagery. These overhead views reveal expanding agricultural zones pressing closer to the shrinking riverbanks, while the river's meandering path has straightened and simplified as water pressure decreases, unable to maintain natural curves and oxbows. Human factors, dams, agriculture, and politics. While climate change contributes significantly to the Jordan's decline, human activity bears the greater responsibility for the river's plight. The transformation began in earnest during the 1950s and 1960s with major infrastructure projects that forever altered the river's hydrology. Israel's national water carrier, completed in 1964, diverts approximately 500 million cubic meters of water annually from the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan's main throughway to support cities and agriculture in central and southern Israel. This single project reduced the river's downstream flow by nearly 40% overnight. Similarly, Jordan's East Gore Canal, now the King Abdullah Canal, began diverting Yarmouk River water away from the Jordan River system in the 1960s. Syria has constructed more than 40 dams on tributaries that once fed the Jordan, capturing water before it ever reaches the main river. These structures have multiplied since the 1970s, each one taking another small bite from the river's potential volume. Together, these water management systems from the three countries capture approximately 98% of the Jordan's natural flow before it reaches the Dead Sea. The political complexity cannot be overstated. The river traverses one of the world's most contested regions, flowing through or alongside territories disputed by multiple parties. Formal water-sharing agreements exist, but remain contentious with accusations of violations common. During periods of drought, these tensions escalate as each nation prioritizes its own water security. Agriculture consumes approximately 70% of the diverted water, much of it used inefficiently. Flood irrigation remains common in parts of Jordan and Syria, while water-intensive crops like bananas and dates are grown in climatic conditions that naturally wouldn't support them. Israel's agricultural sector has implemented more advanced conservation techniques but still demands substantial water allocations. Urban growth compounds these pressures. The population in the watershed has increased tenfold since 1950, with cities like Amman, Jordan growing from 100,000 residents to over 4 million today. Each new resident requires water for drinking, sanitation, and associated economic activities. Water policies often incentivize consumption rather than conservation. Subsidized water pricing for agricultural users encourages overuse, while infrastructure investment has historically favored supply expansion over demand management. The political popularity of providing abundant, cheap water makes conservation initiatives difficult to implement. Biblical prophecies connected to the Jordan. As the Jordan's waters recede, many religious scholars have begun examining ancient texts with renewed interest, finding passages that seem to speak directly to our current situation. Throughout the Bible, the Jordan River appears repeatedly as both a physical setting and powerful metaphor, but several prophecies specifically address its potential drying. Perhaps most striking is Isaiah 19:5-6, which warns, "The waters of the river will dry up, and the riverbed will be parched and dry. The canals will stink, the streams of Egypt will dwindle and dry up." While this directly references the Nile, some theological interpretations apply this prophecy more broadly to include the Jordan, especially when read alongside Zechariah 10:11, which speaks of how the depths of the Nile will dry up. Revelation, the Bible's apocalyptic conclusion, contains imagery that some connect to the Jordan's fate. Revelation 16:12 describes the Euphrates River drying to prepare the way for the kings of the East. While this specifically names another Middle Eastern river, some eschatological interpretations view this as a pattern that might apply to multiple waterways in the region before the end times. The Book of Ezekiel contains elaborate visions of water flowing from the temple toward the Dead Sea, healing the lifeless waters, a reversal of the current situation where the diminished Jordan fails to sustain the Dead Sea. Some scholars interpret this as suggesting that the river's natural decline must precede a divine restoration. More broadly, numerous biblical passages connect environmental calamities with divine judgment. Hosea 4:3 warns that the land dries up because of human wickedness, while Jeremiah 14 describes drought as both natural disaster and spiritual metaphor. These texts establish a pattern of understanding ecological collapse as potentially meaningful beyond mere natural processes. Jesus himself referenced the Jordan indirectly when speaking of end-time signs in Luke 21-25, mentioning signs in the sun, moon, and stars, and the roaring and tossing of the sea, causing people to faint with fear. Some interpret this broader ecological distress as encompassing major changes to significant waterways. What makes these prophecies particularly compelling to some believers is their specificity regarding location. The Jordan isn't just any river, it's the specific waterway God chose for numerous pivotal moments in salvation history. Its prominence in Scripture gives its current decline added theological weight for those inclined to see divine patterns in environmental events. End times prophecies across religions. The drying of the Jordan resonates not only in Judeo-Christian traditions but across multiple faith systems that include end times narratives featuring environmental collapse. This broader religious context helps us understand why the river's decline carries such powerful symbolic weight for many believers worldwide. In Islamic eschatology, several hadiths, sayings attributed to Prophet Muhammad, speak of natural disasters preceding the Day of Judgment. One particularly relevant tradition states, "The hour will not come until the land of the Arabs returns to being pastures and rivers." Some Islamic scholars interpret this to mean that currently fertile lands will become barren before the end, potentially including the transformation of the Jordan Valley from oasis to desert. Hindu traditions contain cyclical time concepts where the current Kali Yuga, age of conflict, features environmental degradation before renewal. Sacred texts like the Puranas describe rivers drying up as one sign of this age's advanced stage, where Dharma, cosmic order, stands diminished. Similarly, Buddhist texts speak of natural calamities marking the end of a cosmic cycle, with water-related disasters featuring prominently. Native American spiritual traditions, particularly those from drought-prone regions, contain stories about rivers disappearing as signs of disharmony between humans and natural forces. The Hopi prophecies specifically mention the drying of waters preceding a time of purification and potential renewal. Several features appear consistently across these diverse traditions. First is the notion that visible environmental changes serve as readable signs of spiritual conditions. Second is the connection between human behavior and environmental consequences, the idea that ecological collapse represents a moral reckoning. Third is the concept of thresholds, that certain environmental changes signal a transition between cosmic ages or eras. What distinguishes religious interpretations from purely scientific ones is the assignment of meaning. Where environmental science sees cause-effect relationships between human activities and hydrological outcomes, religious frameworks often add an additional layer of cosmic significance, divine intention, or moral messaging. Interestingly, these religious perspectives sometimes align with scientific understandings in identifying human activity as the core problem, though they differ in their explanatory frameworks. Where science points to dams and water diversion, religious texts might point to greed and poor stewardship as the underlying causes, ultimately arriving at similar conclusions through different pathways. The Islamic perspective. Islam holds a particular relationship with water that makes the Jordan River's decline especially significant in Islamic thought. The Quran repeatedly emphasizes water as essential to life, stating, "We made from water every living thing," 21:30, establishing water as both physical necessity and spiritual symbol. While the Jordan River isn't mentioned by name in the Quran, it falls within what Islamic tradition considers blessed lands, al-Ard al-Muqaddasa. The river runs through territories with deep connections to numerous prophets recognized in Islam, including Ibrahim, Abraham, Musa, Moses, and Isa, Jesus, whom Muslims revere. The Jordan Valley's environmental integrity thus carries religious significance beyond its practical importance. Several hadiths speak of environmental signs preceding the Day of Judgment, One collection records the Prophet Muhammad saying that before the final hour, the land of the Arabs will return to being pastures and rivers. Some scholars interpret this to mean currently fertile regions becoming barren, while others suggest the opposite, that deserts might become green again through divine intervention. Either way, dramatic hydrological changes feature prominently in Islamic eschatology. The concept of mizan, balance, in Islamic teachings applies directly to environmental concerns. The Quran warns against fasad, corruption on land and sea caused by human hands. Many contemporary Muslim environmentalists interpret the Jordan's decline as a manifestation of this imbalance, humans disrupting natural systems established by Allah. Islamic jurisprudence contains specific water management principles, including priorities of use, with drinking water taking precedence over irrigation, and prohibitions against water monopolization. Some Muslim scholars argue that current water diversion practices violate these principles, creating religious as well as environmental concerns. For Muslims living along the Jordan, particularly in Jordan and Palestine, the river's decline affects religious practices like wudu, ritual ablution, and ghusl, ritual bathing. The deteriorating water quality raises questions about the water's ritual purity, tahara, while scarcity affects accessibility for religious uses. Contemporary Islamic environmental movements increasingly frame water conservation as a religious duty, fard. Organizations like the Islamic Foundation for Ecology and Environmental Sciences cite the Quranic principle of humans as Khalifa, stewards, responsible for maintaining natural systems as Allah intended them. The crossing over symbolism. The Jordan River's most powerful symbolic function has always been as a boundary between states of being, a liminal space where transformation occurs. This crossing over symbolism appears repeatedly throughout religious texts and remains alive in contemporary spiritual imagination, making the river's physical diminishment spiritually troubling on a symbolic level. In the biblical narrative, crossing the Jordan marked the Israelites' transition from wandering to settlement, from homelessness to homeland. Joshua 3 describes how the waters miraculously parted, allowing the people to cross on dry ground, an echo of the earlier Red Sea crossing, but now leading to fulfillment rather than escape. This established the river as a threshold between promise and realization. Early Christian baptismal theology drew heavily on this crossing imagery. When converts were immersed in water, they symbolically passed through the Jordan, dying to their old lives and emerging into new spiritual existence. The physical act mirrored the spiritual transition from sin to salvation, from death to life. Even today, baptismal liturgies often reference passing through the waters as spiritual boundary crossing. In mystical traditions across multiple faiths, rivers frequently represent the boundary between earthly existence and spiritual realms. The Jordan specifically has been adopted into spiritual songs, poems, and literature as the final boundary between mortal life and eternal reward. African American spirituals powerfully employed this metaphor in songs like Deep River and Roll Jordan Roll, where crossing the Jordan represented both heavenly reward and earthly freedom. What happens to this powerful spiritual metaphor when the physical river disappears? Religious thinkers have begun grappling with this question. Some suggest that the river's diminishment itself carries symbolic meaning, perhaps indicating that traditional boundaries between spiritual states are thinning as we approach eschatological fulfillment. Others worry that the physical degradation damages our ability to access powerful religious metaphors rooted in natural phenomena. The Jordan's physical crossing points have also historically served as cultural and political boundaries. As these waters recede, some borders become more permeable physically while simultaneously being more rigidly enforced politically. This creates an interesting tension between the symbolic thinning of boundaries and their practical reinforcement. Similar historical river crises. The Jordan's predicament isn't unique. Throughout human history, major rivers have faced similar crises, offering potential lessons and warnings about what might lie ahead. By examining these parallel cases, we gain perspective on both the environmental trajectory and how societies respond to such fundamental changes. The Colorado River in the American Southwest presents striking similarities. Once flowing vigorously to the Gulf of California, it now rarely reaches its natural delta due to extensive damming and diversion. The 1922 Colorado River Compact allocated more water than actually exists in the system, creating structural scarcity amplified by climate change. Tourism at the Grand Canyon has been affected by changing flow patterns, much as Jordan River baptism sites face challenges.
Once filled the valley below, supporting a thriving tourism industry centered around a bustling marina.
The difference? The Colorado primarily supported economic activities, while the Jordan carries additional layers of religious significance. China's Yellow River has periodically run dry since the 1970s, with increasing frequency each decade. In 1997, it failed to reach the sea for a record 226 days. Agricultural diversion, industrial use, and population growth created demand exceeding supply. The Chinese government responded with the massive south-to-north water diversion project, an engineering approach that prioritizes human needs over ecological integrity, similar to strategies employed in the Jordan Basin. The Aral Sea disaster offers a cautionary extreme case. Once the world's fourth largest lake, fed by the Amu Darya and Syr Darya rivers, it has lost 90% of its volume since Soviet irrigation projects diverted its source waters. The resulting ecological collapse destroyed regional fishing industries and created salt-laden dust storms affecting human health. While lacking the Jordan's religious significance, the Aral crisis demonstrates how quickly relatively stable water systems can collapse when human demands exceed natural replenishment. Australia's Murray-Darling Basin experienced severe decline during the Millennium Drought 1996 to 2010, requiring fundamental reconsideration of water allocations between agricultural, urban, and environmental needs. The Australian government ultimately purchased water rights specifically for environmental flows, a potential model for the Jordan, though complicated by the river's international nature. Historically, civilizations have often risen and fallen with their water resources. The ancient Sumerian civilization in Mesopotamia declined partly due to irrigation practices that salinized soils and reduced agricultural productivity, a warning that short-term water management decisions can have very long-term consequences. What distinguishes successful responses from failed ones? Adaptive management, recognition of ecological limits, and governance systems that balance competing needs seem essential. Rivers that have stabilized or recovered typically benefit from legal frameworks that explicitly recognize environmental water requirements, technological improvements in efficiency, and cultural shifts in water valuation. Ecological consequences. Beyond its human significance, the Jordan River supports, or once supported, a remarkable ecosystem now under severe threat. The environmental consequences of its reduced flow extend far beyond the river channel itself, creating cascading effects throughout the regional ecology. The river historically supported over 500 plant species and served as critical habitat for approximately 300 bird species. As riparian zones shrink, this biodiversity faces alarming decline. Migratory birds that once used the Jordan Valley as a crucial stopover on the Africa-Eurasia flyway now find diminished feeding grounds. Species like the Dead Sea sparrow and Palestinian sunbird face population pressures as their specialized habitats contract. Aquatic life has been particularly hard hit. Native fish species, including the Jordan doctorfish and Levantine scraper, have seen population collapses exceeding 60% in recent decades. Several invertebrate species believed endemic to the river system haven't been observed in scientific surveys since the early 2000s, raising extinction concerns. The rhythm of seasonal flooding that once rejuvenated floodplain ecosystems has been disrupted by flow regulation. These periodic inundations previously distributed nutrients, cleared invasive vegetation, and triggered reproduction cycles for numerous species. Without them, ecosystem functions deteriorate. Native riparian vegetation like white poplar and Jordan tamarisk struggles to propagate, while salt-tolerant invasive species expand their range. Water quality degradation compounds quantity problems. Increased salinity levels exceed tolerance thresholds for many freshwater organisms. Agricultural runoff introduces pesticides and fertilizers, while inadequately treated sewage contributes pathogens and pharmaceutical compounds. These pollutants accumulate in organisms through bioaccumulation, affecting entire food webs. The changing hydrology has altered groundwater systems connected to the river. As the water table drops, desert oases and springs that historically dotted the landscape have disappeared. These microhabitats often supported unique assemblages of organisms adapted to their specific conditions. Ainfishkar, once one of the largest freshwater springs in the region, now flows at less than 40% of its historical volume. Soil systems suffer as well. Reduced flooding means less natural sediment deposition that historically maintained soil fertility. Simultaneously, declining vegetation cover increases erosion risk. The resulting soil degradation creates a negative feedback loop where plant communities struggle to recover even in years with better water conditions. Climate impacts intensify these ecological pressures. Higher temperatures increase evaporation rates and plant water stress. Changed precipitation patterns disrupt seasonal biological cycles. Species with limited mobility or narrow environmental tolerances face the greatest challenges adapting to these combined pressures. The Dead Sea Connection. The Jordan River's fate is inextricably linked to that of the Dead Sea, creating an environmental crisis extending beyond the river itself. As the Jordan delivers less water to this terminal lake, profound changes cascade through the region's geology, chemistry, and human communities. The Dead Sea has dropped more than 30 meters since the 1960s, with the pace accelerating to approximately 1.2 meters annually in recent years. Its surface area has shrunk by a third, creating a landscape of retreating shorelines and expanding mudflats. Satellite imagery shows the once continuous water body now splitting into northern and southern basins, with the southern section maintained artificially for mineral extraction. This isn't merely an aesthetic change. As the Dead Sea contracts, thousands of sinkholes have formed along its receding shores. These dangerous ground collapses occur when underground salt layers, previously stabilized by saturated groundwater, dissolve as fresher water reaches them. Over 6,000 sinkholes have appeared since the 1980s, swallowing roads, buildings, and agricultural lands. Popular beaches have closed and infrastructure has been abandoned or relocated. The sea's changing chemistry presents additional challenges. Always extremely saline, the Dead Sea's salt concentration has increased as its volume decreases. This has altered the precise mineral balances that make the waters therapeutic for certain skin conditions. Tourism operators advertise the sea's healing properties, while scientists warn that its composition is increasingly different from the historically beneficial formula. The ecological dimension is equally concerning. While the hypersaline main body of the Dead Sea supports minimal life beyond specialized microorganisms, the freshwater springs and seeps around its perimeter created unique microhabitats supporting specialized plant and animal communities. As these interface zones shift or disappear entirely, the adapted species face extinction threats. For humans, the Dead Sea represents both economic opportunity and health benefit. The tourism sector employs thousands in Jordan and Israel, while mineral extraction companies produce potash, bromine, and magnesium for global markets. Both industries face increasing operational challenges as water levels drop. Hotels once located at the water's edge now require shuttle services to reach the receding shoreline, while extraction companies must extend their pumping infrastructure. Religious and historical sites around the Dead Sea face threats as well. The area contains numerous locations important to Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions, including Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, and sites identified with biblical narratives like Sodom and Gomorrah. Archaeological preservation becomes more difficult as changing hydrology affects soil stability and salt crystallization damages ancient structures. Proposed solutions include the controversial Red Sea Dead Seawater Conveyance Project, which would transfer water from the Red Sea to replenish the Dead Sea while generating hydroelectric power and providing desalinated drinking water. Environmental critics warn this might alter the Dead Sea's unique chemical composition and create unforeseen ecological consequences. Scientific projections versus prophetic interpretations. As we contemplate the Jordan River's future, two distinct frameworks offer competing or perhaps complementary perspectives. Scientific modeling projects physical trajectories based on data, while religious prophecy interprets events through spiritual lenses. The tension and overlap between these approaches reveals much about how humans make meaning from environmental change. Climate scientists project that the eastern Mediterranean region will experience 2.4 degrees C warming by 2050, with precipitation declining 15 to 25% compared to historical averages. Hydrological models incorporating these changes suggest the Jordan's natural flow could decrease by an additional 30% even without increased human consumption. Ecological models predict accelerating biodiversity loss, with riparian specialist species particularly vulnerable. These scientific projections follow methodical processes, gathering empirical data, identifying trends, building computer models incorporating multiple variables, and generating probability-based scenarios. The resulting projections carry uncertainties but rely on observable, measurable phenomena and established physical principles. Prophetic interpretations work differently. They begin with authoritative religious texts, apply hermeneutical principles to understand their meaning, identify patterns between current events and prophetic descriptions, and derive meaning from these connections. While scientific projections aim to describe what will likely happen based on current trajectories, prophetic interpretations focus on why it's happening and what it signifies within a cosmic narrative. These approaches sometimes converge in surprising ways. Both scientific and many religious frameworks identify human activity as the primary cause of the Jordan's decline. Both recognize thresholds or tipping points where gradual changes trigger dramatic systemic shifts. Both often call for changed human behavior in response to environmental degradation. They diverge significantly, however, in their understanding of agency and purpose. Scientific models generally view the river's decline as an unintended consequence of human actions and natural processes without inherent meaning. Prophetic interpretations often perceive divine intent or cosmic significance, the physical changes serving as communication from supernatural forces or fulfillment of predetermined patterns. Time horizons differ as well. Scientific projections typically extend decades forward, rarely beyond a century due to compounding uncertainties. Prophetic frameworks often place current events within much longer time frames, millennia-long divine plans approaching culmination. This creates different urgency assessments. Science emphasizes immediate action to prevent worse outcomes, while some prophetic views suggest environmental decline necessarily precedes divine intervention. For individuals making sense of the Jordan's transformation, these frameworks aren't always mutually exclusive. Many religious environmentalists integrate scientific understanding of causes with religious frameworks for meaning. As one Christian ecologist working in the region stated, God may have known this would happen, may even use it for spiritual purposes, but that doesn't absolve us from responsibility for our poor stewardship, potential solutions, and international response. Despite the Jordan River's dire situation, viable solutions exist, though implementing them requires navigating complex technical, political, and economic challenges. International response has gradually increased as the crisis has deepened, offering tentative hope amid continuing decline. Water conservation presents the most immediate opportunity. Agricultural irrigation efficiency in the basin currently averages only 50 to 60%, meaning nearly half of water withdrawn never benefits crops. Modern drip irrigation, soil moisture monitoring, and crop selection could reduce agricultural consumption by 30% while maintaining productivity. Israel has pioneered many of these techniques, achieving 90% efficiency in some operations, but implementation remains inconsistent across the watershed. Urban water systems throughout the region lose 30 to 50% of supply through leaking infrastructure. System upgrades could recover significant volumes currently wasted. Jordan, facing the region's most severe water scarcity, has begun systematically replacing aging pipes in Amman with international financing support. Wastewater recycling offers another promising avenue. Israel already reuses 85% of its municipal wastewater for agriculture, the highest rate globally, but other basin countries lag significantly. Expanding treatment capacity and implementing safety standards for agricultural reuse could simultaneously reduce freshwater demand and pollution loads entering the river. Transboundary cooperation remains essential but politically challenging. The 1994 Israel-Jordan peace treaty included water allocation agreements that environmental changes have rendered increasingly problematic. More flexible arrangements that adapt to changing conditions and explicitly allocate water for ecological functions could better serve both human and environmental needs. Several international organizations have engaged with the crisis. The World Bank has funded water efficiency projects throughout the watershed, while the United Nations Environment Programme has facilitated dialogue between riparian states. EcoPeace Middle East, a unique organization with offices in Israel, Jordan, and Palestine, advocates for cooperative approaches through its Good Water Neighbors program. Religious institutions have increasingly joined conservation efforts. The Vatican has issued statements supporting Jordan River restoration as a spiritual imperative. The Alliance of Religions and Conservation has developed faith-based water conservation curricula used in religious schools throughout the region. These religious voices complement scientific advocacy, reaching constituencies who might not respond to purely environmental arguments. Economic instruments show promise for shifting water usage patterns. Current subsidies often encourage water-intensive practices, while true costs of water depletion remain externalized. Revised pricing structures carefully implemented with protections for vulnerable populations could better reflect water's scarcity value. Water markets allowing voluntary transfers between users have shown potential in pilot projects, though they require robust regulatory frameworks. Technical solutions include selective dam reoperation to better mimic natural flow patterns, targeted habitat restoration in critical riparian zones, and pollution control enforcement. The rehabilitation zones approach, focusing intensive restoration efforts on ecologically significant river sections rather than attempting complete restoration, has shown promise in similar degraded rivers globally.